So, sorry, I'm going to make a mistake. I'm going to cut that part out. Good thing I'm going to be able to edit this, so it's going to be able to be whatever. Okay. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whenever you're watching it. We have a confirmation retreat coming up, and we need your help to be able to help witness Christ in your life. We all have a story about Christ in our life, and we need to share it. And we share it in many different ways. One of the ways that I'd like to prepare you tonight about is to specifically share a short testimony, a 3-minute testimony. It doesn't share your entire life with Christ, and we're not trying to. We're trying to give 3 minutes of showing one way in which God has worked in your life. And so these testimonies that I think are really effective, just 3 minutes, have 3 parts. A part of relating, of kind of where you were before you encountered Christ, a turning point of your encounter with Christ, and then the effect of that encounter. How did that change your life? Why was that important? We want to shoot it for 3 minutes because there's a lot more that we can share. Absolutely, there's a lot more ways, but we want to be able to do it in grab size, something that somebody can take away and know at least one part of your story. And so I'm going to share one and give you kind of an example of what it might look like. Yours is going to look different, and I actually have multiple testimonies that I can give if I'm focusing on specific parts, and so I'll kind of demonstrate that here. So let's say we're at the confirmation retreat, and we'll just start. You want to start with an introduction, which is very simple, actually telling the people who you are, even if they know who you are. So one of the important things about this testimony is you want to practice. You want to practice partly because you want to know what you're going to say so that you don't get distracted and you can't either take off the plane or land the plane. We talk about that in kind of talks, right? You'll notice that with me when I just keep on circling around the issue as I try to stop, okay? That's me not being able to land the plane because I don't know exactly how to land the plane. So we actually want to practice that so that it can be shorter, because otherwise, just by trying to land the plane, it can add a whole nother minute on. Or if we don't know what parts are important, right? We want to be able to practice it and cut out parts that we realize aren't central to the story. And so it's really helpful to be able to time that. And so I've actually got a timer in front of me, and I'm going to just set a timer for 3 minutes. And ideally, we just have about a minute for each one. So my name is Father Samuel. I've been in Japan for a year now, and I'm active duty Navy chaplain. Today I wanted to share you about the way that God has worked in my life, especially through the Eucharist. When I grew up in a good Catholic family, going to Mass every single Sunday, went to Catholic school, and was taught about Jesus and about what we're supposed to do. We did a lot of service. I was pretty religious in comparison to a lot of my classmates. But I wouldn't say that I liked going to Mass. In fact, I didn't like going to Mass. One of my first memories of Mass was when I was a little kid and everybody was exiting out of the pew to go up to communion, and I knew that part of Mass because it was obvious, and I knew that Mass was at least halfway done. I was just waiting for the end. That's what I was thinking about as a little kid. Not exactly all that holy. I was excited for serving because it made Mass go by faster. That's why I was excited for Mass, or to serve, not because I wanted to serve. When I got to college, I again continued that, not really wanting to go to Mass, but something got me to go to Mass. And in fact, I started going to daily Mass with another classmate as well. That first year was really hard, really tough. It was really stressful. And I kind of sought out daily Mass, not so much to go to Mass, but partly to get away, to get a little retreat and peace. Well, one day I was walking out of daily Mass, and I had this giant grin on my face. I was really confused because although I wasn't depressed, I wasn't happy either. And I was surprised that I was smiling, just ear to ear grinning, just walking along. I was like, wait, what was different about today? I realized I was going to a class I didn't like. I didn't do anything really different about the day. And just as soon as I ruled out those other things, it clicked. I just received Jesus in the Eucharist. And although I maybe would have been able to articulate that before, I didn't really approach the Eucharist as receiving Jesus. I just saw it as a symbol. But that moment I knew that the Eucharist was something more and that it could give me joy. And there was something more than just a symbol, something more than just escaping from the world or a little pause. But there was something in the Eucharist that I desired and that I needed for happiness in life. And so I started, that transformed my life. Before I was going occasionally to daily mass, but then I made it a priority every single day. I even sometimes got in trouble for skipping meetings and other things in order to be able to go to mass, because I knew that that was important. And it started to drive me deeper in my faith. I started to learn more about the Eucharist, read John chapter 6, and it just anchored me in a way that I knew who God was. I knew the anchor in my life was that daily mass. It started to be prayer. It started to be God. I started to help out more in church, and all of a sudden I realized that I was happier than I had ever been. And so my sharing this with you is I hope that, you've went to Mass a lot of times, and I just encourage you, there's a lot more there than maybe what you've already experienced. That Jesus Christ is truly present in the Eucharist, and that I hope that you, if you take nothing from this, that you can read John chapter 6, and that you can keep just that openness that Jesus Christ is truly present, body, blood, soul, and divinity in the Eucharist. Thank you for listening. All right, so that end scene, right, was a little bit over 3 minutes. I didn't kind of tighten up certain things. I wasn't exactly confident in a few things that I spoke, and so it dragged out a little bit longer. Probably would be helpful for you is to be able to watch yourself and to be able to maybe write down more notes than I wrote down, and to be able to help out in that way. We've got a sheet to be able to help you kind of think through that process. Some questions about what was your life like, and specifically what I like to share in that relating, that first section, is you have people who are in front of you, and you want to share those things that maybe they relate to, right? There's a lot to share about your life, but you want to share those things that relate to you, specifically about your faith, and that maybe define it. Now, it doesn't tell everything, right? I had a lot more experiences as a kid than just my first memory of Mass or about serving. But those are the ones that maybe just a little bit relate, and specifically relate with what I'm going to talk about in the way that Jesus Christ encountered me, or that I encountered Jesus later on in the Eucharist. When I shared that, I should have explained a few things, like daily Mass, that Mass happens every single day, not just on Sunday. And one of the things about daily Mass that I always like to mention is that it's a little bit shorter. If I would have been on my game, those are things that, again, to relate a little bit, to explain a little bit, you want to explain those points that maybe not everyone knows, and you want to take away the things that people don't need to know. So one of the things that I didn't mention in my story is that I went to the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis. Now, sometimes I'll mention that because that's important. It's somewhat relevant here in the military, but I didn't feel like it was important enough to the story to mention it and take time on it. Okay, so I actually took that out. The last part is the effect. We want to talk about how that changed your life. How did you approach God differently than before? And so with that, I specifically shared that it changed my approach to Mass, right? And that I was able to learn more, and that it changed my life. And so we want to offer a little bit of hope and kind of effect there at the end, all right? So one of the tips, I want to share a few tips as before I share a second testimony, just about confession, is a few tips is to practice the start and the finish, like I talked about earlier. We want to take off the plane, get into the story, and also to land the plane as early as we can. We want to explain terms. So if there's anything that not 100% of Catholics know, even the Eucharist, I should have actually probably explained that a little bit, right? Used a few different terms so that maybe people know about that. We want to take out complexity. We want to not say, not have to explain the more complex aspects if that's not essential to it. We want to smile, okay? We want to be infectious. This is something that God has done in our life, and we want to share that joy that hopefully we've experienced with it. Now, it should be authentic, okay? So one of the things that I write down is people want to listen to happy people, right? If you're happy, they want to listen to you. But don't be fake, because kids can smell that out, inauthenticity in a heartbeat. But you can always smile because, God has done good things in your life. You are sharing good things in it. Lastly, is it's your story. Don't lie, okay? God works differently in every single life. And you might think that your story is kind of boring, that it's not very exciting, you didn't experience a huge epiphany. That's okay. In fact, for some of those kids, that's going to be the more important witness and testimony. Is just in very small, very subtle ways of consistency that you started to recognize, and that you look back on your life to be able to do that. So don't try to trump it up. Don't try to make yourself worse or sound better. Share your story. and try to relate in those ways. Kids are all different places, and we need different testimonies to be shared with these kids. This looking over the testimony, I hope that you remember more than just one time that you God affected your life and anchored you in some way in your faith, right? I hope that you have multiple instances of that. One of the helpful reasons why we want to share that story is because a lot of times we forget about it, okay? I know for myself, I forget about some of the ways that God has worked in my life. And without sharing it, without remembering it and taking time to remember those times about why I'm Catholic, we might forget ourselves. And so this testimony isn't just for the confirmation students. This isn't just for the people that you share, but it's also for you to remind yourself of the way that God has worked in your life. So I hope that you see this as a fruitful endeavor as well for yourself. All right. I am going to set another timer, and I'm going to share a slightly different testimony, but with some of the same elements. All right, so we'll start out. 3 minutes. Hi, my name is Father Samuel. I've been in Japan for a year now, and I'm an active duty Navy chaplain. I wanted to share to you today a little bit about how the way that God has worked in my life, specifically through forgiveness and the sacrament of reconciliation. When I grew up, I grew up in a good Catholic family, going to Mass every Sunday, and we went to CCD and Catholic school, and so we would go to confession originally. I remember going to my first confession, not liking it very much, and I remember going maybe once or twice after that when everybody kind of went there for Lent, but I kind of stopped going as soon as I could. I didn't seek out the occasion at any time other than when I had to. And I really can't remember any time between my first confession and really college that I went. When I got to college, I started investing a little bit more in my faith and encountered God, but I still didn't like confession at all. It scared me. Why would I confess my sins? Why did I need to do that? What would the priest think? And really, what was the point of it? And so I didn't approach it. I was invited one winter over to a Focus conference. Focus was Fellowship of Catholic University Students, and they have missionaries all over the place who kind of hold Bible studies and try to help us, help college students grow in their faith. They invited us to a conference, so it was a few days where great speakers and to talk with people, and there they talked about confession on a few different occasions, and I had been growing enough in my faith that I started to trust the Catholic Church and some of the sacraments, and so I had to give confession a second thought. And I finally came to a certain point where I decided that I needed to go to confession. I needed to go to confession. If I believed in God, if I believed in the Catholic Church, I needed to go to confession. But I still didn't want to. So I thought, well, this is the best time to be able to do it because I'll be able to go to a priest that I don't know. So I walked outside the door to get into line for confession, and the line was like wrapped around the lobby, and it looked like it was going to take 5 hours for me to get to see a priest. And so I walked away, went back to my room, and didn't go to confession. But I made a promise to myself that I would go the next Tuesday that was offered at my college to go to confession. And in fact, not just go that Tuesday, but go to confession every single Tuesday until I was comfortable with it. And so that's what I did. I went to confession, and I started going to confession, and I encountered the mercy of God. And I went again and again and again. And it was healing for me, and my spiritual life transformed. And I can link it very clearly to that moment when I started going to confession, when I started opening myself up to grace, that God started working in amazing ways, that I was open to God in ways that I couldn't even believe. I continue to not always enjoy going to confession, but I always know that it's so important for me, that I never want to go, specifically myself as a priest, want to go more than 2 weeks without going to confession. I know that that will happen at times, maybe on a ship, but again, that's my goal. And so I hope to just encourage you to, maybe you don't like going to confession, to give it a second thought, to maybe go even though that you don't want to, because it has amazing grace, and that God wants to make that place a place of victory, a renunciation of sin, not a place of fear, not a place of beating yourself up. Thank you for listening to my story. Pause. Okay, great. So again, I went a few minutes over. I shared probably a little bit more in terms of the time where I encountered God and kind of the lead up, as opposed to what really concrete effect. That would probably be my critique of it. Now, it's okay at times, sometimes, to have a longer kind of, the way that was kind of I was sharing a little bit that it didn't happen right away, but it kind of happened over time, and so it took a little bit more. But that would be kind of my one critique. And my critique of myself is to share a little bit more concrete ways in which I experience God changing my spiritual life after. Okay. My other critique of that testimony would be that I said something that I didn't need to say. I said a focus conference. Now, sometimes that might be essential to the story. It wasn't essential to that story, and it took some time for me to be able to explain what focus was. It's actually one of the things that I specifically put on a sheet to try to avoid, and told you to. And so that's one of the things that I would try to fix. I would say I went to a conference, a Catholic conference. Again, kind of generic, a little bit easier, so that I might have to explain what a conference is, but that's essential to the story, that there's Catholic talks and there's other things happening that way. It wasn't essential about the focus. So so hope, again, not the biggest deal, but something to just make it a little bit better, a little bit more impactful, so that we can spend more time on the more important things. Your story is going to be different. And again, God has worked in many different ways. So I hope that you can practice this. If you'd like to practice with me or somebody else, please do, right? Record yourself. Not that we need to have a perfectly polished. In fact, it should be perfectly polished, because it should be your story, and so you're just sharing your story. But the more that you practice it, the better that it'll be, and the more that hopefully you'll be able to share the way that God has worked in your life. Thank you so much for considering taking this. One of the other aspects that I'll just share real quick is that the confirmation retreat is going to be focused on anchoring. Okay, so we want our testimonies, if they can, to be kind of shared in one ways that it's anchored you in your life. And especially if you've been in the military, or a lot of these kids are in military families, they're transitioning to high school, and so we want to be able to share those ways in which the faith can anchor us in the midst of transition, in the midst of craziness. So if you have a specific story of maybe a time where God helped anchor you, where your faith really helped anchor you in the midst of transition, in the midst of difficulty, I would ask you to consider maybe sharing one of those stories of your testimony as well. Again, thank you so much for being willing to do this. I hope that this is a blessing for you, and I know that it will be a blessing for the community as well. So have a good night. God bless. We'll talk again soon.